And today I'm going to be joined by Aseem Malhotra yet again. Later in the show, we're going to bring Darshan Shah in here. He is the founder of Next Health, world's first and largest health optimization and longevity clinic. We're going to talk about longevity specifically. He was a cancer surgeon who then switched over to functional medicine and has been very dedicated to sustaining health. He was also an alumni at Harvard Business School, and he's also at the Singularity University. He has authored books. We'll get into all of it. You can follow him at next-health.com. But first up, it'll be Aseem Malhotra. We are waiting on him. He's in Great Britain, I believe, right now, and so we're having all kinds of technical and timing issues. But you know him, cardiologist. He's been raising the alarm about the vaccine for quite some time. When his own father died of a coronary event out of the blue. You can follow him at Dr. Aseem, A-S-E-E-M, Malhotra, M-A-L-H-O-T-R-A, on X. And the new film, I suggest you check it out. First, Do No Pharm. I'll have some comments after this.
Our laws as it pertains to substances are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous.
I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that?
I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people.
I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals.
Let's just deal with what's real.
We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time.
Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat.
If you have trouble you can't stop and you want to help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
Joint and muscle pains are exhausting and frustrating, but I've got a over-the-counter medication I want to introduce you to that provides great relief using the power of, check it out, chili peppers. Capsidin is made with a proprietary formula that contains no non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents, no opioids, no anesthetic or steroid, nothing, no chance for addiction, no side effects, no chance it's going to interact with other medication you might be taking. Capsidin contains capsaicin, which is the substance in chili peppers that burns your tongue. That gives you that burny feeling. And of course, I've recommended capsaicin creams to patients over the years, but other capsaicin creams burn your skin. That's what makes capsidin so unique. In clinical trials, capsidin has actually been demonstrated not to burn.
I've been using capsidin to relieve my pain in my hands and my wrist from carpal tunnel syndrome and arthritis. The results have been amazing. I use it every day during my show, and I highly recommend it.
Get the pain relief you need from various sources, even backache, sprains, bruises even. Order now at capsidin.com/Drew to get a 15% discount plus free shipping. That is CAPSADYN, capsidin.com/DREW. Dr. Malhotra and I have been talking about these concerns for quite some time. He has been at the forefront. He's been a champion. He's been touring the world speaking about this topic. And very interestingly, he's had a new, what shall we say, a high court that has ordered a fake news outlet to pay a large libel damage. Dr. Malhotra, there it is. They have to, this is the Mail on Sunday, they have to apologize for accusing him and nutritionist of spreading fake news about statins. Wow, incredible. And of course, we're going to talk about first Do No Pharm. We've got a lot to talk about. Please welcome Aseem Malhotra.
Hi, Drew. Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. What world are you in right now? What hemisphere?
I'm actually in the States. I'm in Austin at the moment. I'm on a tour of the US. Really trying to promote and get as much attention as possible on the new documentary film I've co-produced called First Do No Pharm.
There it is. We've got a full screen of it right there. Talk to us about why they should see it, what they're going to learn, and how they see it.
Yeah, so it's a documentary film that really uncovers every layer of how big pharma and to some degree big food have corrupted medical information and health information, and how we got here, and also solutions moving forward. So, it's independently made. We crowdfunded initially after, we got a boost from Joe Rogan when I announced that the film was being done in May last year. And, it's got amazing feedback so far from doctors, members of the public. We had a screening in Austin yesterday, and Callie Means came, who, as you probably know, is one of the chief health policy advisors to Donald Trump and to RFK Jr. And he was saying millions of people need to watch this. This is going to change health policy. So it kind of puts everything together, Drew, if you like, over about almost 2 hours, how we have got to this really terrible situation in terms of the pandemic of chronic disease and how we can wind back those harms. But in essence, we won't fix healthcare, American healthcare, unless we correct commercial distortions in the scientific evidence. So it really goes to the root cause of the problem.
And so this more recent libel finding and the damages, what were you saying and what were they taking aim at?
Yeah, so 2019, the Mail on Sunday actually did a story which you can be best described as a hatchet job on myself, another doctor, GP called Malcolm Kendrick, and a nutrition scientist, a brilliant nutrition scientist called Zoe Harcum. And it was a front page linked article, and it said that we were spreading deadly propaganda about statins. In fact, the editorial, I mean, people can laugh at this now, but it was pretty shocking. The editorial from the health editor read, there is a special place in hell for doctors who say statins don't work. And then there were pictures of myself and Zoe and Malcolm. And it completely misrepresented our views on statins. Of course, I'm all for informed consent. And what happened as a result, Drew, is I lost my job in the NHS about a month after that because of that article, wasn't able to get back in. Zoe and Malcolm decided to launch a libel case. I decided not to, for various reasons. My mum had just died. I was wanting to carry my activism in the battle, and I thought there's no point, sort of getting involved in this libel case, which, to be honest, for all intents and purposes at the time, thought we probably wouldn't win and wasn't going to be beneficial. But good on Zoe and Malcolm for fighting the fight. And they ultimately, the judge ruled in favor of us. There was an apology that was given specifically to Zoe and Malcolm in the Mail on Sunday. The whole article's been taken down from being online. And of course, Mail on Sunday has a huge influence and power in British media. So this is kind of unprecedented. But hurrah, it's a moral victory if nothing else. And but yeah, all of us have suffered in the process, reputational damage, but we're still here fighting the good fight.
Yeah, huzzah indeed. Is this a breakthrough where we will begin to be able to hold the press accountable for their dangerous excesses and the harm they do to people?
Drew, it should be. I think it's a really big deal, and I think that it will be sending shockwaves to the press probably around the world to see what's happened in this particular case. And also it gives us a bit more fuel to say, we're going to carry on fighting for informed consent, fighting for greater transparency in medicine, calling out conflicts of interest. And I think it might make those, newspapers think twice before they start doing smearing campaigns on doctors who just want to look after their patients.
And back to Do No Pharm, I don't know, where you are with statins these days. I'm not anti-statin, yet I do appreciate that the science, and certainly initially around statins, was shitty, and people aren't aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes down to informed consent for me, but not just that. I think when you get into the nitty-gritty of the data, and certainly the published data, which is already probably curated and an exaggerated benefit. Those benefits are very small. Right. If you haven't had a heart attack, you're talking about maybe a 1% benefit over 5 years in preventing a heart attack or a non-disabling stroke and not prolonging your life. Most patients around the world, which is between 200 million, maybe 1 billion people prescribed statins, are in that category. But they're not given this information, Drew, and that's a real scandal. There's no real informed consent going on. And again, it isn't me saying don't take a statin. Tell the patients this information. They may decide they want to take it. They may decide they don't want to take it. But that's how we should be practicing medicine. It's kind of changing the paradigm of the conversation between doctor and patient. We call it shared decision-making. I call it ethical evidence-based medical practice. That's a form of informed consent that's necessary. So that is something we need to keep fighting for.
I call it how medicine has always been practiced, how I trained my residents, and how it was always done. And the fact that we have moved away from that to this weird top-down, or in this country, when we have computer-mandated protocols and things because of the electronic medical record, that is literally anathema to the practice of medicine. And yesterday I interviewed Scott Atlas, and he alerted me to the fact that Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci really have no capacity, and many of the people in the bureaucratic structure of, let's call it health policy or public health, have no experience with risk-reward analysis, which is the foundation of medical practice. Just what you're advocating for, that the risk-reward is assessed, you offer your patient your judgment, you educate the patient, you let the patient participate in the decision-making, and off you go. But if you don't have the risk-reward in mind, you are only going to do harm.
Absolutely. I think this is probably a conditioning. I mean, they are older, more so-called more experienced doctors, but they maybe haven't shifted with how medicine should have shifted towards a more shared decision-making type of scenario with patients. But also, they have got to their positions of power, Drew, by being part of a system which is corrupt, right? Which in a way, and I'm not saying about them individually, but I suspect, and I've seen this in the UK with people in senior medical positions, people I know, is they start to compromise their principles, because they are trying to please big pharma. And eventually, once they start compromising their principles, when they start turning a blind eye to misdemeanors that go on within medical research, eventually that line disappears. And that, I think, reflects maybe to some degree what the likes of Fauci and his colleagues, unfortunately. It's for a new...
And that is Do No Pharm. And now let's flip over to sort of the mandate stuff, that the fact that these things were mandated, which is just, I hope it looks as absurd through the retrospectoscope of history as it does to me at this point. But and so many excesses, so many bizarre things about COVID, but not the least of which was mandates of a vaccine for which the risk reward was essentially unknown, and then continued to be pushed when the illness changed completely. Now, your dad, you believe, died of a coronary event related to the vaccine. Is that an accurate history?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his post-mortem findings showed 2 critical stenosis or narrowings in 3 of his coronary arteries. We'd had scans on him a few years earlier. He was in a pretty low risk. And something had happened that had caused an acceleration. And then published data came out revealing that. And then, of course, other data, observational data, and excess deaths, and all that we know, autopsy studies, you put it all together, you can make a very clear case that unfortunately, one of the side effects of the COVID mRNA vaccines is they cause coronary inflammation and therefore probably increase your cardiovascular risk, certainly for a period of time, maybe a few months, maybe a year. But what happens is then someone's baseline risk is then increased significantly. And they go from a point where they may have suffered a cardiac arrest or heart attack at 85, and now they're having it at 70 or 75. And that's the problem.
So I want to dig in a little deeper on this story. So you and I have talked about how it's likely the spike protein is the pathogenic mechanism, and both COVID and the vaccine, particularly the mRNA vaccine, which creates a lot of spike protein, which causes the inflammation of the artery, which causes the deposition of the inflammatory material, the cholesterol, whatnot. Now, a JAMA study came out, I think, a week ago that announced that, COVID is what really causes heart disease, okay? And I'd been suspicious about that for a while. And I thought, but I've never seen it from Omicron. And so I looked into the data, and lo and behold, all of it was collected from January 2020, which means it was Alpha and Delta. And there was, different illness. And then on top of that, there was some data that came out about 2 weeks ago that showed the highest risk of, now we're switching into myocarditis, I believe, if I remember this data right, not coronary disease, but related, was from people that had COVID and mRNA vaccine. Those are the ones most likely to get. And given that everybody has had COVID, that means everybody's going to be in that risk category. So there's myocarditis, there's coronary disease, and there's Omicron, and there's mandates of an mRNA vaccine that causes the pathogenic mechanism that produces the pathogenic mechanism for all of it. I want to tell you a story real quick. I had a calcium score of 0 forever. I've been on a statin forever too. My dad had terrible vascular disease. I think we've had this conversation before. He had a really bad large vessel. That's kind of a different thing than coronary disease, right? And I was like, I do not want to have that. I don't want thromboembolic disease. I do not want anything to do with this. So I got a statin very early. And I had, Turned out, by the way, insulin and sugar was a bigger issue for me. I learned later down the road, but I've taken care of that also. And I know you've been a champion of that issue, because as soon as I cut out sugars, guess what? My HDL went up, my triglycerides went down. Shocking. So anyway, different issue. There's a lot packed into this story. I went back and had a fancy AI calcium score and essentially sort of an angiogram. And lo and behold, my calcium score had gone up quite a bit. I think it was around 200, 150, something like that. And they were able to isolate a small area, actually a distal branch of the LAD. I think it was a circumflex branch or something. It's a small little branch with some really fixed arterial stenosis. I have no symptoms. It's no whatever. I'm adding aspirin to my routine. But to me, I had terrible alpha or delta. I had really bad. And I thought, and I didn't get the mRNA vaccine. And I thought, oh, this is probably what COVID does, something like this. And it's just, but not Omicron. So interpret all that for me. What is, give them my long story and your dad's, it's interesting, right? I'm wondering if you're seeing coronary disease from alpha and delta. I'm wondering if you're seeing, go ahead.
Yeah, really interesting. So Drew, just to clarify, you didn't have any of the COVID vaccines?
No, I had J&J, and I had a colossal reaction to it where I woke up in the morning with raccoon eye, which is the presenting feature of the transverse sinus thrombosis, which is the dreaded complication of the J&J that no other male had except me. So and by the way, it passed, and go ahead.
So Drew, it's possible that the J&J may have played a role. I'm not just trying to distract from all the possibilities here, but that's one thing.
No, it could. It could have.
It could have. I think the other thing to say as well is, one of the things that happened, and only you know subjectively, Drew, how you were, but I think for most people during the lockdowns, stress levels went up as well massively. And we know that chronic severe stress can accelerate coronary disease as well. Definitely. That's one of the factors. So that you've got to throw that in the equation. But yeah, let's not exclude COVID. And again, what's interesting is I looked at the data before that. I haven't seen this recent JAMA study, but the previous systematic review that looked at the evidence of COVID and heart disease, interestingly, only found a relationship with events, as in people having heart attacks, having had COVID, in the ones that were hospitalized. There was, in the non-hospitalized COVID patients, there was a lower risk, interesting, it's bizarre, a lower risk of having heart attack than someone who didn't have COVID.
Yeah.
So I think there are probably multifactorial issues here, Drew, as well.
Yep. And by the way, it was more severe COVID that had the coronary stuff. And yes, there was more in the hospitalized group in this, if I remember right, in this study as well. But
absolutely.
Oh crap! The other thing I wanted to mention. Oh no, my aging brain. Well, but you said something that triggered me. I'm going to lose it. But anyway, I want to transition over to a slightly different topic. And get your thoughts on this too. And again, as far as goes to mandates, one of the, as I said, I interviewed Scott Atlas yesterday, and one of the interviews came back to me was the one I did with Peter Hotez, and his constant moving of the targets. Everyone gets a vaccine, they're cured, they're going to be fine, they'll never transmit it. It's always been a two-type vaccine. It's always been a vaccine and a booster. It's always been indefinite boostering vaccine. Whatever. I talked to him and I was like, look, I had COVID. It's not that big a deal. I had long COVID. It was nasty. And he said, oh my God. It was toward the end of the interview. He went, oh my God. Did you see from the UK brain shrinkage? They have brain shrink. I don't want my brain to shrink. My brain's going to shrink. And the interview ended and I thought, oh my God, he doesn't know that all serious illness, because he's a pediatrician, he does not know that all serious illness in adults is prone to causing brain shrinkage. And now here is an article it is in Nature Aging. It is from just a couple of weeks ago, talking about the specific immunogenic mechanisms that they think are responsible for here, let me just read it to you. Influenza, viral, respiratory, skin, and subcutaneous infections are associated with increasing long-term risk. Infections were also associated with region-specific brain volume loss, most likely the temporal lobe. Multiple different illnesses cause this. And I want to tell you, when I had my long COVID, listen to this. This is kind of interesting too. I had this very powerful feeling. I had bad brain fog, but I had this very powerful feeling that if I learned a new language, got back to the piano, or tried dancing, that would help me clear my fog. And we were going temporal lobe stuff, all temporal lobe stuff. And we were going to Greece that summer. So I thought, I'm going to learn Greek. Maybe it'll help. In 2 weeks, it cleared my fog. Coincidence? I don't know. Wow. It's an N of 1, but here we go. So the point is the panic, the insanity around COVID, and the fact that bureaucrats are making decisions without risk-reward analysis. It requires clinical experience like this to understand, to contextualize these illnesses. That yes, severe illness causes temporal lobe problems in adults.
Yeah. 100%. I completely agree with you, Drew.
Mandating vaccines with unknown risk.
Is this the article?
Did you see there's that. Thank you for pulling that article.
Okay,
well done. That is the article. Yes, that's how they were able to identify what were the drivers of the post-infection brain atrophy. Not, lo and behold, there is post-infection brain atrophy. There has always been post-infection brain atrophy, and they're just looking at the mechanisms for it. One other thing, Aseem, sorry to keep jumping all over the place. Did you see recently that Australian local politicians are starting to organize and take aim at the excesses of public health during COVID? I'm wondering if you've been involved with that at all.
Yeah, well, actually, my very good friend instigated it, Adrian McRae, who I think you met, Drew, in California last year. So Adrian was behind it. He's got a political role now. It's amazing. It's really, really good news. And again, this is a global issue, and we have to try and support each other really to get the truth out. And of course, you and I know, we're dealing with something that is unfortunately very, very, damaging, potentially long-term and horrific, and a lot of unknowns associated with this genetic therapy, immune system issues. There is definitely one eminent oncologist feels that it's going to be driving cancer. We need to really get to the bottom of it, and we can only do that when there is a sort of more a moratorium. There's a kind of we need to stop. And we need to really look and try and identify who's at risk and what tests need to be done and what we need to do to implement helping people with vaccine injuries. And the longer this denial goes on from the medical establishment, the more damage is going to be done for trust, but also to population health.
Last time we were together, we were on stage helping support RFK Jr. How do you feel about the direction he's going now and his potential? My feeling has always been I've not had a strong... if he wanted to be president, great. But I wanted his brain in Washington, one way or another. And I still feel very strongly about that. Do you feel like he's going to get there in some way? And if he does, is Adrian going to be there? Are you going to be there? How's that all going to work? Do you have any idea? You talking to them?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I mean, we've been in contact, with each other on a relatively regular basis. So, and I agree with you. I think his brain, the world needs his brain in Washington. He's somebody that really understands the issues. He's extremely articulate. He comes from an amazing family. I think he has great moral courage, and he's exactly epitomizes what we need of our politicians. So I very much hope he has an influence in Washington. Whoever gets in, he needs to be there. He needs to be at the table. And I think he's not going to go away. I think he's got a huge following now. He's got a lot of people to support him. I think he's shown brilliant leadership, and anything I can do to help and support him and advise him, I'll be there for him.
So you've been very, very concerned about the vaccines. Is there anything right now that you have your eye on in terms of targeting? Again, my concern is I feel like nobody's taking the vaccines right now, so I'm not as alarmed as I was. And if people want it, I feel like I can give them sort of informed consent. Now, by the way, one of the things I tell them is, I'm not sure what you're doing because XEC is arriving here, and this is a vaccine for JN1 that is not here anymore. But okay, if you feel better getting the vaccine, I can't really recommend it, but I'll certainly won't step out of the way. I'll step out of the way if that's what you want to do. These are very elderly patients. But what are you doing? How are we taking aim at this now? How do we make, it to me, the big concern is not so much the present moment, but if this should happen again, how do we make sure these excesses are curtailed?
Yeah. I mean, I tried on several occasions, Drew, before the pandemic to call for public inquiries into big pharma, because invariably what happens is that clinical research is never or rarely independently evaluated. So we have to go to square one of the root cause. So if we get greater transparency, independent evaluation of drug trials, or drug trials are not conducted by drug industry but independently done, then we can be more confident on the risks and benefits of all medications. So that's really what we need to do. I think the second thing from a policy level is that we need to remove commercial conflicts of interest over health policy and decision making, because our regulators, the UK regulator, the FDA, are getting at least 50, if not more, percentage of their funding from big pharma. And that's a real problem. So the people we trust to do the independent evaluations are conflicted, and they're not doing their job properly, clearly, as we've seen with the rollout of the COVID mRNA vaccines. I mean, just to make it more clear to people, a reanalysis, and we've talked about this, I think you've interviewed Joseph Freeman, a reanalysis of those original trials by Pfizer
several times
suggested more harm than good from the beginning. And if due diligence had been done at the very beginning, then it probably wouldn't have been approved. But it was rushed and there were conflicts of interest. So, that's what needs to change in the system so this doesn't happen again, in my view.
So I want to repeat what you said because it bears repeating, is that the original studies that the FDA approved did not show that it prevented the disease. It did not show that it prevented transmission. A large group was lost to follow-up that we still don't know what happened to them. All, if I remember right, all adverse events were only considered 2 weeks after the vaccine was administered. Isn't that correct, if I remember right?
Yeah.
And no proper double-blinded controlled trials of any real significance. It was not done properly. As you said, the adverse events looked more significant than the benefits, depending how you analyze the data, of course, but I think reasonably so. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so what they found was that the serious adverse event rate in the original trials at short term, 2 months, was 1 in 800, right? Which suggests that we know there are medium to longer term harms. So that's an underestimate of the real harms over a longer period of time. Yep. And that was more common than people in the placebo group being hospitalized with COVID. So that suggests certainly it was more harm than good from the beginning on average. But even that rate of 1 in 800 is very, very high for a so-called vaccine. We've suspended other vaccines for much less harm. Yeah.
Absolutely, and if I remember right, weren't the endpoints hospitalization, not death, or any of those sorts of more serious endpoints? There was no reduction in
COVID deaths. Yeah, there was no reduction in COVID deaths and no reduction in all-cause mortality from the trial.
Yeah, so let's all remember that's the vaccine that was mandated. Now, even I, understanding that, and I've talked to Dr. Freeman several times, and it's been astonishing every time I talk to him, but. And also, he has talked to the FDA, and they've reported serious adverse events. I'm dying to get some follow-up on how those reports were followed up, because they were completely missed by the so-called authorities. But they mandated the vaccine for years after Alpha and Delta passed. Even I, understanding the shortcomings of the science, I am willing to say, okay, it was an emergency. People were in a panic. They were trying to do the right thing. In Alpha, because Alpha and Delta was nasty. It was a nasty illness. I get it. It was not your average bear. We were sort of unclear. I even worry, Aseem, that the government may have known that it was a bioweapon on the loose with maybe certain potential that we all still don't know about. I'm willing to entertain that. Certainly looks like that. And so they may have been really panicking about that. You could argue they were trying to cover their ass because they were involved in the development and all that as well. I'm certain that could be a part of the story as well. But the fact is they continued to mandate it well into the Omicron era, including the present moment. And to me, that is not only inexcusable, it's disgusting. What do you say?
I completely agree. And in fact, when the mandates came out, Drew, and towards the latter half of 2021, my first instinct was this doesn't make sense, because by that stage we knew on stopping transmission from real world data, we knew there were serious harms. I said, this doesn't make sense. The only people that would benefit from it, and therefore likely have been pushing it, are the drug companies such as Pfizer. And then I think Li Fang is his name, is an investigative journalist, I think published a few months ago, and he did an investigation and found that Pfizer were quietly funding, giving tens of thousands of dollars to grassroots organizations that are credible to push the mandate narrative. So, and this happened before. Well, yes, we know what happened with the Vioxx scandal with Merck, anti-inflammatory drug, pulled from the market, killed 60,000 Americans. Merck knew it was going to cause increased heart attacks and strokes. They still went along and pushed it and marketed it. But when the FDA alerted Merck to the fact there was a cardiovascular risk and they should put a black box warning on their packaging, Merck ignored the FDA's warning and doubled down on their marketing, right? So think about that. When these companies know there's a problem, that's when they go to the other extreme. And I think they thought, if we push the mandate narrative, people are automatically going to assume that it's safe and effective, and we're going to make more money. And that's why the diagnosis for these corporations and the way they make money is psychopathic. They're psychopaths. Well, they are psychopathic as entities in the way they make money. And I think people need to understand that.
Well, I think it's not unreasonable to think about corporations as psychopathic because they technically don't have emotion. And so they make decisions in their own self-interest, and that's that. So that kind of makes sense to me. And I worry, I always worry about I worry about the bureaucracy. I worry about the government. I worry about the limitations of our ability to have discourse and free speech and access to things that we might need to help our patients. For instance, the fact that Vioxx was immediately taken away ignominiously, that was a great drug. It had real risks associated with it, but it was a great drug. And I have patients that have never been the same without Vioxx, with horrible rheumatic conditions. And by the same token, I worry that, I don't know, God forbid, if these mRNA technologies have some utility that we haven't seen, or some particular situation where I need it, I can't get it because they've gone so far one way that we've all gone and said, we got to get rid of these things, come what may. And I understand that, but the same thing with opiates. Opiate thing, I was fighting that pandemic tooth and nail. Now, when I need an opiate for a patient, I can't get it. It's almost impossible to get an opiate for a patient appropriately. This is because of the enemy of centralization of healthcare. So doctors can't do their job. And that really, to me, that's the enemy in this whole story. That these people that are not clinicians making decisions, bureaucrat making decisions on high mandates, disgusting. And I don't see it changing in the near term. And I don't know how we change it.
No, I agree. I mean, I think we just need better information. I think it needs to be much more down to informed consent. And as long as patients know there's a potential harm that's accurate, and they decide that the benefits for them are likely to outweigh the harms, or the doctor feels that way, then why not? But that's the issue, is lack of transparency and lack of accountability as well, Drew. I mean, with all this going on with the COVID vaccines, I mean, we were told from the likes of Fauci that if you take the vaccine, you're not going to get infected. But we know that's completely false. Where's the apology? Where's the, I thought apology? I had the best, exactly. I had the best of intentions. I believed the data. I now realize the data was flawed. And we need to look at this again. Where is that conversation happening? Why is Fauci not talking about that? Because as doctors, Drew, we're also taught if we make a mistake, we apologize, and the apology isn't enough. You have to basically also demonstrate genuinely to patients, and if they're very forgiving, that you will do whatever you can to make this sure this doesn't happen again and somebody else isn't harmed. And that's the way that the medical establishment need to really approach the issue of the COVID vaccine now. Because the longer they go on, Drew, the less trust. And I don't know if you know, there was a study in the States recently showed that trust in the medical profession had gone from an all-time high at 72%, very high trust in April 2020, to now less than 40% trust. So, and
I'm sure it's still falling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree. And of course, Stanford now and Jay Bhattacharya are leading the way in opening this discourse. The movie is Do No Pharm. Tell people again the website, where to get it, how to see it, what they're going to experience. Let's do the pitch.
Yeah, thank you. So it's First Do No Pharm, and obviously it's a take on First Do No Harm, but Pharm with a PH. And the website is nopharmfilm.com, PHARM.com. And you can, we've obviously put our own, resources and time into it. My co-producer is a director. This is the way he makes his living. So we're just trying to at least recoup costs so people can download it for $10. But it really does expose the whole system. And for me, it isn't just about getting it to the masses. It's about influencing policymakers. We had a screening in the US Capitol. Senator Ron Johnson hosted it. He thought it was excellent. We're hopefully getting it to policymakers as well. Hopefully Donald Trump will see it. We need likes of Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, who's been very heavily involved in the whole censorship of what is actual important health information has been getting censored. And I suspect for most of these people, Drew, I believe in that most people are intrinsically good. I think this is just ignorance. People have been captured, their minds have been captured. Once they see this film, they won't be able to unsee it. And I think that can only be a good thing.
As far as mind capture, I'm thinking a lot about that these days, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen to anybody going forward, that we got to really buttress ourselves against that, because that is indeed how we got into the craziness of all this, at least partially. Again, say hi to your friend Adrian in Australia. It was really a pleasure to get to know him. He's an interesting dude. He told me all about his salmon fishing days up in Alaska. I don't know if you heard those stories. They're pretty intense. And we will follow you. Your X again is Dr. Aseem, Aseem Malhotra, Malhotra. It's always good to talk to you, my friend. Good luck with the film. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Drew.
You got it. And we have coming up another guest. We're going to talk about longevity with Darshan Shah. He's the head of Next Health Clinics, and he was a cancer surgeon, and he's got some really interesting stories to tell us, and we'll focus in on longevity after this. The Wellness Company knows that taking charge of your family's healthcare is a top priority, and that is why they are constantly innovating to deliver the products and services to help you be rationally ready for an emergency. They've added a medical kit for kids to treat over 20 childhood illnesses: nausea, vomiting, allergies, asthma, bioterror, God forbid, croup, ear infections, lice, and more. And you can also order the kids kit with an EpiPen. Carefully sourced, great price. If there's a risk of anaphylaxis for your kids, you want that EpiPen. That can be in all kits, each customized for a different purpose. It comes, of course, with a telemedicine consultation and a guidebook, and you can replenish the meds up to 2 years after the date of purchase. So go to drdrew.com/2WC for 10% off any medical emergency kit or supplements. That is drdrew.com/TWC. I want to teach you about pharmacogenomic testing. This is changing the way we approach healthcare. By analyzing a patient's genetic profile, pharmacogenomics helps physicians personalize drug treatments for more effective results. First, it enhances medication efficacy by predicting how a patient will respond to a specific drug, reducing the trial and error process, especially in mental health care. For example, it can guide the choice of various medications to minimize side effects and improve outcomes. In the long run, pharmacogenomic testing leads to cost savings. It shortens the time to find the right treatment and avoids expensive side effects. It also supports more personalized care, helping physicians make better decisions and ensuring that treatments are tailored to each individual's unique genetic makeup. Test simply requires you to swab your cheek, then you send in the sample to our lab. Discover the power of personalized medicine with pharmacogenomic testing. Tailor your treatments based on your unique genetic makeup. Reduce trial and error, avoid side effects, find the most effective medication for you. Take control of your health today. Go to drdrew.com/checkgenetics. That is drdrew.com/checkgenetics. I'm excited to bring you a new product, a new supplement, Fatty. I take it. I make Susan take it. My whole family takes it. This comes out of, believe it or not, dolphin research. The Navy maintains a fleet of dolphins, and a brilliant veterinarian recognized that these dolphins sometimes developed a syndrome identical to our Alzheimer's disease. Those dolphins were deficient in a particular fatty acid. She replaced the fatty acid, and they didn't get the Alzheimer's. Humans have the same issue, and we are more deficient in this particular fatty acid than ever before. And a simple replacement of this fatty acid called C15 will help us prevent these syndromes. It's published in a recent journal called Metabolites. It's a new nutritional C15, pentadecanoic acid it's called. The deficiency that we are developing for C15 creates something called the cellular fragility syndrome. This is the first nutritional deficiency syndrome to be discovered in 75 years and may be affecting us in many ways, and as many as 1 in 3 of us. This is an important breakthrough. Take advantage of it. Go to fatty15.com/drdrew to receive 15% off a 90-day starter kit subscription, or use code Dr. Drew at checkout for that 15% off, or just go to our website, drdrew.com/fatty15.
Smell is sexy. Or sushi. Or Dr. Drupinski.
What?
I'm going to talk for a minute about the Juvent Micro Impact Platform. It's a game changer. We've all heard of impact loading. Our bones grow and stay strong when they're exposed to certain levels of stress, like walking, running. Juvent gives you the same benefit, but in a way that's gentle and safe for your joints if you have joint issues, especially if you're dealing with osteoporosis, arthritis, recovering from an injury. Juvent uses low magnitude, high frequency micro impact technology. Now, that might sound like technical issues here, but here's what it means. When you stand on this platform, it safely delivers tiny impacts that your body needs for optimal bone and joint health. Remember, bones don't just hold us up, they play a role in our body's immune response as well. We produce stem cells, key obviously to tissue repair, immune function, tissue regeneration. Juvent helps stimulate that process naturally so your body can heal without invasive treatments. Unlike other vibration plates out there that can actually be dangerous and too intense, Juvent uses a fraction of the energy while still delivering powerful health benefits proven in these studies. So if you're serious about optimizing your health and wellness, if you want to strengthen your bones and improve mobility, check out Juvent, J-U-V-E-N, Micro Impact Platform at drdrew.com/Juvent. That is drdrew.com/Juvent. And be sure to use the code Drew for $500 off your Juvent today. So Dr. Shah will be here in a minute. Let me tell you about him so when he gets here, you'll have all the proper intro in mind. He is the founder of Next Health, the world's largest health optimization longevity clinic. He's a board-certified surgeon. He was a cancer surgeon, which is a very intense surgical specialty. Longevity medicine specialist. He has performed over 20,000 surgeries. His degree at age 21 and training at Mayo Clinic, alumni at Harvard Business School, as I said, and the Singularity University. Dr. Shah has authored a book, published papers, patented devices, given many, many, many speeches. You can find out more at next.health.com. And he is at Darshan, D-A-R-S-H-A-N, Shah, S-H-A-H-M-D. Please welcome Dr. Darshan Shah.
Well, Dr. Shah, here, but we don't see your camera. There he is. There you go.
We need camera for him to come on. I hear you, but I don't see. There you are. Thank you for joining us. So, first of all, I want to thank you for the NR infusions, the nicotinamide riboside that both Susan and I took. She in particular, like, when can we go back to Next Health? When can we get another NR infusion? The second one, she was the driving force behind. I'm an NR fan. I think people know I use that as part of my longevity program. But the IV infusion is a whole next level with it. Tell people about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the most powerful therapeutics that I've seen over the last 10 years doing this longevity medicine stuff, and I've seen everything, doing IV and nicotinamide riboside, in general, has been one of the most powerful things that I've seen really help people get their health back. And what I mean by that is give them their vitality, their energy back. Every cell in our body needs a molecule called NAD to make energy. Without energy, those cells cannot function. And I'm talking your nerve cells can't transmit signals. Your liver cells can't detoxify you. Your heart cells can't beat as hard as they need to. All of this stuff requires energy. And most of us, especially after the age of 44, our energy stores get depleted. And that's what leads to, over time, aging. NAD and NR specifically, nicotinamide riboside specifically, replenish the ingredients for energy production. And that's why it's so powerful. And, you know, myself and many longevity physicians use this on a regular basis with our patients. Some patients get it weekly. I say at least once a month doing an IV infusion can be a game changer.
And, you know, I worry about oxidation, the oxidative stress on cells and cell membranes. Both the cell membrane itself and the mitochondrial membranes. And I feel like it's been my contention for over 10 years, that things that target that move the oxidative state of the cell away from oxidation tend to be associated with cell health and longevity. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Absolutely. Like, for people that don't know, oxidation is basically rusting of our cells. It's when we make too many of these reactive oxygen species, and then they cause the cell walls to be damaged. And NAD, nicotinamide riboside especially, can move the balance away from oxidation. Now, it's important to note that you do need a little bit of oxidation. That little bit of stress on your cell does help cell to realize that it needs to function properly. But we just live in an incredibly massive amount of environmental burden of oxidative stress right now that our cells just can't catch up.
Right. And I like I said, NR is part of that. Let's talk about longevity more generally. I kind of feel like, I don't know how to describe it, as whether it's the kind of golden age of longevity management or whether we're just sort of finally getting to a place where we can actually do something or we actually know something. Maybe there'll be a golden age in the future that's even more so. But I feel like we can say very meaningful things now about how longevity works, how you can impact it. I'll let you sort of give your favorite topics. For me, it's the oxidative state of the cell membrane and muscle mass. Those are my two favorites. Maintaining muscle mass as we age, and then paying attention to the oxidative state, and then avoiding things that are frankly poison, alcohol, tobacco, things like that.
Yeah, you hit on three of my favorites right there. Maintaining low oxidative stress, maintaining muscle mass, which to me, I'll state it a little bit differently, Dr. Drew. I will say maintaining metabolic health. Okay, so your metabolism.
Well, I feel like that's a bigger topic. That's interesting that you go there. So talk about that, because that's a big topic. I'm trying to focus on little things. Do resistance training when you talk about metabolic health. And I want you to get into this. Now you're talking about hormones. Now you're talking about insulin metabolism. Now you're talking about genetics of the individual and where they distribute their fat and things. So go ahead, have at it.
Okay, so let's take it a 10,000 foot view on this. Your metabolic health is your body's ability to process sugar. And when you have too much sugar and your body can no longer process it, your body starts secreting too much insulin, you get insulin resistance, and that creates metabolic health issues. And what the key message here is that your metabolism lives in your muscle. And why is that? Because most of the mitochondria that we have in our body are in our muscle, and your mitochondria is what's processing this glucose for energy. Okay. And so if you have a healthy amount of muscle and you have good mitochondria, you'll be able to process glucose better. And you can't do that if you don't have muscles. So every single person listening to you, if they don't have a 3 times a week strength training routine, I would say, and you're over 40 years old, you got to get that in. It's so important. Even if it's 20 minutes, just that little bit of signal for your muscle to make more mitochondria is going to maintain your metabolic health.
And one of the things, it's interesting, I've been a kind of a meathead weightlifter my whole life. And early on, they started talking about breaking the muscle, the sarcoplasmic membranes down and building mitochondria. There was a lot of talk about that 10 years ago even, which is interesting.
Yeah, because that's something you can see under a microscope, right? Like when you broke the sarcoplasmic reticulum, more mitochondria formed. We saw it under a microscope. I don't think we really knew what that meant until the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, and well, I know, as always, bodybuilders are like chemists, and they were on it early, and so they saw it as a way to build muscle mass. They're like, oh, there's more mitochondria. I can get more protein development from that too. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and this kind of ties into the NR conversation, because having more mitochondria is helpful, and you can do that by having more muscle. But also having effective mitochondria that are efficient at making energy is just as helpful. And you can do that by giving them the precursors that they need to make energy, of which NAD is one.
And then the hormone environment is something that comes up a lot. Oh, by the way, I see people are saying they're taking Niagen 300 milligrams. I think you should take more than 300. I take 500. And when we're doing, and I talked to that fertility expert, and she was saying she's 1,000, and people get pregnant. By the way, I recommended, I don't know if she's going to talk about this publicly, but I recommended someone who was in fertility treatment or entering fertility treatment, hadn't started yet. She's kind of a famous person, and she got pregnant within 3 weeks on Niagen. So there's clearly something very beneficial to cell function is going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think fertility is just an overall indicator of your overall health, your metabolic health. And if you're having problems with fertility, it's time to look at your health overall. It's not just about getting some hormones, it's much more than that.
Well, back to getting some hormones. So the hormonal environment of our metabolic function is complicated. How do you teach people to attend to that? I get a little lost in what, I sort of go back to keeping things simple sometimes when I'm thinking about that. What do you tell patients?
And are you referring to like sex hormones like testosterone, estrogen? Are you referring to those hormones?
I'm thinking primarily about testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone and estrogen and thyroid. So these are all important hormones in this mix.
Very important. I mean, I think there's a few keys here. Number one is to realize that every man and every woman, we will go through menopause and menopause, right? It just happens. And when our hormone levels take a dive, either slowly or quickly, like they do with menopause, it causes a lot of negative changes in our body and some positive ones as well. And so, I think that many people, they accept this as normal aging, but what we're seeing over the last 50 years is much more severe drop-off and people living at much lower numbers than they should be living at. That people back in the 1920s and 30s, they've had much higher levels of testosterone, estrogen as they aged. And so getting your hormone levels checked, extremely important. And that doesn't mean you're going to need to go on hormone replacement therapy. Not everyone needs to, but but at least you know where you are and where you should be. And then you start taking lifestyle measures into place to help improving those hormone levels. And things like strength training, like we talked about, can improve testosterone levels. Decreasing ultra processed food in your diet, decreasing chemicals in your exposure, all helps.
Yeah, and we've ignored women in the perimenopausal phase when we can really do a lot for them, and for men equally in there. I guess we don't really think about it, but there's sort of a perimenopausal phase too, when you really are setting yourself up for what's coming next. You got to pay attention.
Yeah, it's so true. And, I think once again, we all kind of think of this as the normal aging process, but it's really something that's very accelerated in our modern environment. And we all need to be cognizant that we should do something about it. And so ask your doctor to check some biomarkers on you, get your testosterone, estrogen levels measured, get measures like your hemoglobin A1C done so you know what your metabolic health is like. These are all important biomarkers that everyone should be checking on a frequent basis.
And I'm just sitting here thinking, God, we never would resist putting somebody with thyroid disease on thyroid replacement therapy. And in fact, the medical literature is full of all these aggressive therapeutics for mild, thyroid dysfunction. And whether we do that or not is not the point. But and obviously the effects of profound thyroid failure are much different than, say, ovarian failure. But my point is, we are biased against hormone replacement for the sex organs, while the thyroid organ, we would never not recommend replacement when it's appropriate. Yet the sex hormones, we go, that's just nature taking its course. We could say the same thing about thyroid too.
Man, it's such a good point. I never thought of it that way, but you make such a good point. Why don't we treat these hormone deficiencies? Why do we let them just occur and not manage them? And like having a low hormone level leads to higher rates of cancer, higher rates of cardiovascular disease, higher rates of Alzheimer's disease. Maybe this is the reason why we have so much chronic disease, right?
It certainly would be helpful if we paid more attention. And again, I really am big in paying attention earlier, like in your peri phase of all this. Let's talk about a word that's thrown around way, way too much. It's another thing I try to figure out how to teach patients about, but it gets tossed about, which is inflammation. And inflammation clearly is a big enemy in all of this. And you've mentioned insulin metabolism and glucose, which is a significant mediator of endothelial inflammation. Talk to me more about inflammation there and generally.
Right. So inflammation, for the listeners that don't know what that is an overactivity of your immune system. So inflammation is generally good. If you have an injury, that's what heals the injury. But when we are chronically injured, I'll tell you a few reasons why that happened. Our immune system is overactive all the time. And it's kind of like having an army that's out of control. They don't know what to shoot at anymore. And they start damaging our white cells, start damaging our normal cells and causing damage all over our body. The number one area that this happens is in our gut. Our gut is where 90% of our immune system lives. And if our microbiome, the trillions of bacteria, fungi, viruses that live synergistically with us in our gut are not healthy, they cannot protect us from the toxins that come in through our food. The toxins get absorbed through our gut, and our inflammatory system goes crazy, and that causes inflammation. Inflammation is another one of those root causes of disease. This is great, Dr. Drew. We've touched on almost all the root causes of disease in one quick
Well, that's what I want. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get at it.
You got it.
And I look at I want to. Well, I got more for you. I want to look at I tend to look at the endothelial dysfunction, let's call it, of hyperinsulinemia. I try to explain to people that that's how every cell in your body is getting oxygen and nutrients, and that's how the immune cells that you need are getting there, and that's how the inflammatory mediators are being removed. But if those endothelial linings those cells don't work right, you're not going to get even the oxygen, let alone all the other things you need.
Right, absolutely. You're protecting your endothelium is another very important part about your health, and most people don't realize how to do that. And one of the best ways to do that is get your blood pressure checked. The most damage that happens to our blood pressure, to our endothelium, is from having high blood pressure that goes undiagnosed and untreated for decades in most people. 50% of people don't get their blood pressure diagnosed until they're in their 60s or 70s, and they've been living it for the 30 years.
Well, not only that, but people are biased because it does not give you any symptoms. And I was guilty of this too. When you're in primary care, what you see is people going, "Oh, it's up a little bit. I'll watch it. I'll watch it. I had a big meal last night. I'll run more." Yeah, I did that for like 3 years, and finally, a primary person looked at me and said, "You can only outrun your genetics so long." And I was like, "Oh, yes, of course. Everybody in my family has hypertension. I need to take care of this as early as possible and as aggressively as possible." But of course, I was youngish. I was probably late 40s, early 50s, and I didn't want to go on meds, but I immediately did. So,
the meds out there now are very safe. They're super effective, and living with blood pressure for a long time causes all of the chronic diseases as well. Alzheimer's, strokes, liver disease, kidney disease. We know it does. And so I always say the worst blood pressure measurement that you can do is at your doctor's office. You're stressed. The person taking your blood pressure stressed and in a rush. You've got to get your own blood pressure cuff and do it at home. There's a ton of YouTube videos how to get a proper blood pressure measurement. Do it once a month, especially after the age of 40, and get it treated. For every 10 points you're above 130 over 80, you have a 10% increased chance of all-cause mortality, dying from any cause. And people live that way for years, unfortunately.
It's not good. I'm not happy with myself for having done that for a few years. And I still have trouble convincing patients. Yeah, it's ridiculous. You feel like you should be able to outmaneuver it. It's like there should be things you could do, and there are. I didn't have it when I was in my 30s. I would watch my weight, did aerobic exercise and that kind of thing. Salt intake, maybe. Where do you come in on salt? There's some interesting data recently on sodium. Where do you ring in on that one?
Yeah. I think that salt is reducing the amount of salt in your diet just masks the real reason that you have high blood pressure by reducing your plasma volume. The real reason people have high blood pressure is really metabolic disease. It's really all about getting their metabolic disease under control and understanding where you are in that spectrum of having the beginnings of metabolic disease versus diabetes. 95% of Americans are somewhere on that spectrum. And so you got to figure out where you are by checking your hemoglobin A1C and your insulin level and starting to treat it. And so I really believe that although lowering your salt can help temporarily reduce your blood pressure, you got to treat the underlying metabolic causes first.
So let me dig in a little further on that. So in my experience, I feel like early youngish hypertension is more of a renin-angiotensin problem, some communication between the kidney and the right atrium. And they really respond to ACE inhibitors and ARBs and all these things, anything that interferes with that biology. They immediately. Later, the vessel stiffness becomes more of an issue, which is what I associated with the metabolic types of problems and or ongoing hypertension that's inadequately treated, or tobacco and other things, obviously. But my question to you is, I get the connection between metabolic health and vessel elasticity. How does it get into the renin-angiotensin system?
I think they're two separate ways of getting to the same endpoint with hypertension. Like you mentioned, it happens in younger people that they get this secondary hypertension due to the renin-angiotensin system. A lot of that is due to younger people sometimes overtraining. It can be due to high levels of stress. Alcohol can cause that if you're younger. I would say in our clinic, about 20 to 30% of people that we see at the age of 21 to 30 have high blood pressure. So, it's not a disease just of older people. It's happening.
Whoa, that's a new thing. That's a new problem. And that's consistent with everything else that's going haywire with us.
Yeah.
Wow.
It really is. And so, I think there's multiple reasons why people get some of these problems, because what we are conditioned to think in Western medicine is everything is siloed, right? Like your heart disease is your heart, and then your metabolic disease is a different silo, is endocrine, but really it's systems biology teaches us that everything is together. It's all interfacing with each other. You got to treat the body as a whole. But the miracle of that is once you start making progress in one area, everything else starts getting better too. So treating your blood pressure makes your metabolic disease better. Treating your blood pressure can make your kidney better. All of it works together,
Yes. I always think of it as a feedback loop. It goes up that way and it goes down that way, all the loops. So give me a few minutes on hormones, because I'm a little unclear sometimes how to, I'm in men and women, I get, I have some strategies for testosterone, obviously metabolic health, resistance training. I'm not a fan of sustained cardio for anything really than the sex hormones because it drives them down. But HIIT cardio is sometimes very good, very helpful into metabolic health generally. So give me give the audience some tips on the male-female hormone function as it starts to go away, starts to fail, so to speak.
Yeah, let's talk about testosterone a little bit. And, for all the females listening, testosterone is just as important for you as it is for a male. It's hormone,
for sure.
Right? It's a hormone of muscle.
We leave it behind. We've left it behind forever. We've left it out completely. But it's massively deficient in women when the ovaries shut down.
Exactly. And a lot of my patients that are women just getting their testosterone normalized when they're going through perimenopause and not even messing with their estrogen can be a game changer for them, right? And so
I've seen that for sure. I've seen that.
Yeah. So some ways to get your testosterone up naturally are by lifting heavy weights, specifically lifting to failure. And what I mean by that is when you're doing a set, say you're doing 10 exercises of a bench press, that last couple need to be so hard that you can barely do it. That's a really important kind of distinction that we're finding in the now really makes it, really causes those adaptations in the muscle to increase mitochondria, but also helps testosterone boosting. Creatine is one of the most well-studied supplements in human history. 5 to 8 grams of creatine for men and women can truly help boost your hormone levels, but also protect your brain and protect your muscle as well with minimal side effects.
Take that as part of a morning supplement, not just pre-workout, but take it every morning.
Yeah, I think just once a day in the morning. I add it to my morning coffee, actually, just a scoop. It's tasteless. It works really great. Some other ways to help increase your testosterone levels is to not be sedentary. Sedentary behavior, which is defined as being in one place for more than 4 hours, dramatically decreases testosterone for both men and women. So what I do is every 45 minutes, I have a little timer go off on my computer, tells me to get up and move around. And that little break every 45 minutes called the exercise snack can help you maintain good hormone levels and negate the effects of sedentary behavior. And then your diet. Your diet has a lot to do with it. Eating a very processed food, ultra processed food diet can lead to lower hormone levels and higher levels of visceral fat. Visceral fat is a dangerous fat in your abdomen that's underneath your muscles, wrapped around your organs. People that have a lot of visceral fat have low testosterone levels as well. And so if you feel like you have kind of a beer belly or your waist to hip ratio is high, definitely start working on your visceral fat as well.
Which again is back to metabolic health. And then women have a special sort of conundrum, which is as the estrogen goes down, the visceral fat goes up, which drives the estrogen down further. So how do they deal with that?
Yeah, it's tough when that happens. It doesn't happen to all women, but it does happen to women that don't that spend a lot of time sedentary and also have a lot of sugar in their diet, is what I see. And so they can help reduce their visceral fat by avoiding sugar, maintaining good metabolic health, exercising. But I think a lot of women that have a lot of visceral fat respond so well to hormone replacement therapy. It literally changes their life. But, they get back to normal, they feel great, the visceral fat goes away.
And
so
I agree with that. And and I hit cardio too. I'm feeling would really help that population. They if they can do it. And then what was my final category I wanted to get into here? I think it's going to escape me. It's escaping me. So hit cardio, visceral fat, hormone replacement, estrogen, that pretty much covers it.
I got one more for you if you want to tackle one more topic.
Yeah, go ahead. Please.
You've hit on all of the root causes of aging and disease, except one we haven't touched on, which is our level of toxic exposure in our lives. So in the last years, chemical factories that produce 150,000 chemicals that are in our environment, and this toxic burden. We live in one of the most toxic environments ever in human history.
I was going to stop you, Darshan. What I was thinking about was plastics and all that business. Yeah.
There you go.
So keep going.
Yeah, that falls right into the same category. Microplastic, PFAS, all of these things that are in our cosmetics, in our air, in our water, in our food. And so it can be daunting to people, right? Like, how do I decrease my toxic burden? Is it even worth trying? It's absolutely worth it, because a few simple actions reduces your exposure to all toxins, and that is filtering your water, either with a reverse osmosis filter or a filter pitcher, and drinking only out of glass bottles. Stop drinking out of plastic. Secondly is going to the EWG.org, the Environmental Working Group website, and looking at the toxicity of the products that you shower with, brush your teeth with, put on your skin. It's really easy. You can scan the barcode and you can get a score on it. And you can find other products that are EWG certified that cost the same or less as your expensive stuff that don't have these toxins in them. So I highly recommend doing that. As far as your air goes, where do you spend the most time? In your work office and in your bedroom at night. Open the windows if you can when you're sleeping. And if the air outside is not good, if you're in the middle of the city, get some air purifiers. Makes a huge difference in the amount of toxins you breathe into the air, which is a number one form of how we get sick from toxic exposure. So, and then food, just really making sure you focus on organic food that's well sourced, that has not been exposed to pesticides and grown from far, far away, and staying away from ultra processed food. If you can do a few simple actions like that, you're going to detoxify your life. And over time, like, all this stuff adds up day to day, right? So if you could just right the ship in 5 years, you'll completely eliminate more toxins than 90% of humans.
Yeah. It's funny. You told me once that you spent the first 10 years, you loved medicine, trying to convince young people to go into medicine, then the next 10 years dreading it and telling people to get out of it, and finding your way into this as a way of finding meaning in our knowledge and training, and really actually helping people, not just dealing with the consequences of not paying attention to all this. It's funny. I'm finding this late in my career too, that all of a sudden, I think, God, I should have been focused. I've been working out my whole life. I've been paying attention to my diet my whole life. I never made an issue of it for patients or the public. And I really decided I have to do that. And there's, how do you do that in an optimum way? I mean, your Next Health obviously is a great way to go at it. I tend to try to get things on a bigger scale to help as many people as possible. And it's hard. Not everyone can tolerate this conversation we just had, or can do the things we're asking them to do. So I'm thinking a lot about this these days. We have an obligation to help people out. So I appreciate you being with me. I appreciate the NR infusion. I appreciate the work you're doing. What are your last words here before I wrap things up?
Hey, it might sound like it's a lot to get your head wrapped around, but I would say you do one thing every week, and in 52 weeks over a year, you've done 52 things, and that makes a huge difference. You probably don't even need to do 52 things. So don't get overwhelmed. Learn. You're putting a great message out there. There's great podcasts. I'm starting a podcast, Dr. Drew. Launches in a couple of weeks. It's going to be called Extend.
What's it called?
Yeah, Extend.
What's it called? Extend.
EXTEND.
I insist that you allow me to be a guest on that show. That'd be fun.
I would love to have you as a guest on that show. Yeah, and so
great.
we're talking about
great.
extending your health span in your life. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. That is my turning into a pumpkin alarm. I've got to run out here, but we appreciate you being here. Follow Dr. Shaw, Darshan Shah, MD, on X, DARSHAN, SHAHMD. And coming up, we got another big week coming up with us. Well, first of all, this afternoon, Susan is going to put up a show that is not live, but it's a show you might enjoy.
Well, hold up.
We have it? No?
So I was in the middle of editing it, and the second half of the file is corrupted, so I'm trying to get that back in order by tomorrow. So it may or may not go up tomorrow if I can get the files from that event.
Okay.
I'm just still working on it.
Is the Mark Norman and Annie Lederman stuff in there?
Well, it's anything after 7 minutes, so is corrupted. So they might just need to send me the file again.
Shit.
But that's a technical issue.
Okay.
That might just,
right.
yeah. So it depends on when I hear from them.
As great comedians in there, Colby joins Susan. They have a nice time. But they are at the Skank Fest, and they'll explain to you what that is in Las Vegas. Elizabeth Pipko coming. I think she's in studio with Brittany Meyer. We have Cheryl Eck, essentially very interesting. Viva Fry, Emily Kaplan. Emily Kaplan is with the what's the name of their? If you look it up, Caleb, really quick, and tell me. Emily Kaplan's company is called Bad Science or something. She is a really fine thinker and scientist, and she goes at the statin controversy very directly. I think you'll enjoy that conversation. Do you have it there? Does it come up?
Oh, wait, I almost had her, but I'm getting the ESPN reporter. That's not her.
No. Carrie Lake coming in to talk about her run for government, and Jack Posobiec on the heels of that. Debbie Lehman, Lisa Marin, Salty Cracker on the heels of the election. We'll get to a post-mortem with him. And on November 8th, do you have that before I put up the November 8th call to action? Broken Science is Emily Kaplan's thing. Do check them out. They're an excellent group. But the Rumble event we're going to do with Jimmy Dore on the 8th. We think tickets are available. There it is, Two Roads Theater in Studio City. And the special guest, one of them is me. So we will join Jimmy Dore on that date. Oh, so good. I love Roseanne. She's I
love her.
She's wonderful. All right, let's wrap it up. We appreciate you all being here, and we will see you Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Don't miss it. See you then. Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.